In both the writings by Alice Bailey and in Theosophical Teachings, the importance of following the Yoga Sutras is critical. In the Bailey writings, knowing how to go into samadhi is also considered the primary prerequisite for doing white or soul magic. This video series by Dr. Lisa Love examines why. Dr. Lisa Love has studied 5 translations of the Yoga Sutras in depth and will use that knowledge throughout this series.
Before we continue with our look at understanding the Yoga Sutras, we need to examine the models that we are going to use in association with our study. As a reminder from previous videos, there are 4 sections, or sometimes they're called books, to the Yoga Sutras. The first section, section 1, in a brief summary, includes the following. We learn that the purpose of yoga is to discover the self. The problem is that the self is covered, so we do not see it. We are that self, but we don't understand that we are because it is covered, just like clouds cover the sun. These coverings are known as vrittis in the Yoga Sutras, which is an ancient text that shows us how to remove these vrittis so we can discover the self that we are. Though there are preliminary methods for uncovering the self, the main method is a step-by-step meditation practice that leads to various levels of something known as samadhi. Now, this is a comparison video so that we understand the model that we use in comparison to the Yoga Sutras. So if you already know this model, bear with me for just a minute. If you don't, basically there are 7 sections: the physical plane, the emotional plane, the mental plane, which has a dotted line here that divides it into 2 different parts: the plane of the lower mind, the plane of the solar angel, where the soul, the egoic lotus, or what's also known as the causal body, is. Then we have the intuitional plane, which is also known as the Buddhic plane, or the plane of Christ or Krishna consciousness. Then we have the spiritual plane, which is also known as the Atmic plane. And we have this triangle known as Atma, Buddhi, Manas, or the triad that is here, which could also be called Sat Chit Ananda if we're using the system that the Yoga Sutras draws from. Then we have 2 planes that are really beyond human. When we get up here, we're no longer human as we understand it. We have the monadic plane, Anupadaka, which has 3 different levels: will, wisdom, and activity that are reflected in the triad. Why are they reflected in the triad? Because these are the human realms of consciousness. This is beyond the human realm, so it needs to be reflected downward into lower vibrations, where our brains and nervous system can comprehend these levels of consciousness. Then we have the final plane, the Adi or divine plane, which is also the plane of the Logos. The Logos is essentially our planetary Logos, or our planet as a whole, which is a conscious living entity that we live, move, and have our being within. We reside within this planet as cells within its body. So here is just another representation of this same model here, only I've made it easier for you to see the monad, the spiritual triad, the egoic lotus or soul, and the integrated personality. Remember, the integrated personality is from this dotted line all the way up. The coordinated personality includes all of this, the emotional and physical planes. So I'm going to introduce this model again, only add a few things to it. First of all, let's look at this chart here. There are 7 subplanes within this model. Of the 7 planes, 7 subplanes, which here we also have on the physical. And in the Bailey books, this is known as Lemurian consciousness. Why? Because human beings are very primitive at that point and are learning essentially to coordinate their physical bodies to evolve that body so it becomes human-like as we understand what human bodies look like now. Next, on the emotional plane, we have something known as Atlantean consciousness, where most people are driven by emotions and desires. In other words, most people on the planet, which is why we see these symbols here, are driven by their emotional highs and lows throughout the day. The drama of life is something that they don't fully understand. They're just kind of in the ocean being knocked around by the waves, so to speak, of these emotional events. And they're driven by desire, primarily for money, sex, and power. And you can see that by going out pretty much into any city anywhere and looking at what's advertised. Listen to just about any song. Watch just about any movie. Even the very violent ones that are predominating here in the United States where I live are all about wanting power so you can get money or sex or your desires fulfilled. This is where most of humanity is at, here on the emotional plane, stuck in what Bailey calls Atlantean consciousness. Now, her books also say that there are 10 soul groups that go up this way. And most people are in groups 3, 4, 5, and moving into group 6. Group 6 is the coordinated personality when we reach that level, when our personality triangle is complete. Here is the personality. Here is the coordinated personality as she talks about in the books. And we'll have another map which makes this personality triangle seem more easy to understand. The coordinated personality consists primarily of Group 6 materialist, which the Bailey books Esoteric Psychology Volume 2 say are driven primarily by tremendous amount of selfishness. They can get all their desires met for money, sex, and power more than anybody would ever think of. They can get those desires met, but they're very focused on the external world. And for that reason, they're becoming dictatorial. They're becoming narcissistic, malignant narcissists, we might call now. They are basically at a point in evolution, which is a stage that humanity reaches as a coordinated personality, but it's a dangerous stage because they need to make a shift where they start to go inside to look for their well-being and happiness and not outside in the external world. Then we have the mental plane. Remember, it's broken up into 2 sections. Here we see the lower mental, or the higher mental, also known as the plane of the solar angel. Here on the lower mental, we are now having what Bailey calls Aryan consciousness, which is where we're becoming more mentally polarized. We're more able to think intelligently and rationally, but not yet really spiritually. That's when we reach the plane of the solar angel, the higher mental plane, and become the soul or soul infused personality, this level here. And then eventually we move into become the triad, and then the monad and the planetary logos, which we've talked about before. Let's skip over here. These are the different names that are used in the Yoga Sutras and the Yoga and Vedanta systems. the Annamaya Kosha for the physical, and also what we would call the physical etheric. These are the etheric levels at the top of the physical plane. The Pranamaya Kosha, which is somewhat part of the etheric in terms of the prana, but also in this model could include what we would call the emotional plane. They jump then to Manomaya. Mano as connected to the mental plane, so we see that these two levels are kind of a blend here. Here is Manomaya, the lower mental plane for the most part. Vijnanamaya, the higher mental plane for the most part. And then we have the Annamaya Kosha. Kosha means body. I should have said that earlier on, which is the Buddhic plane or the Brahman, Atman, or the Atmic plane here. So there's your correspondences. We're now going to also look briefly at the techniques that the Yoga Sutras explains. They don't really talk that much about asanas in the Yoga Sutras. Those are the Hatha Yoga poses. They do talk about pranayama, the yamas and niyamas, which are the do's and don'ts of moral life. And then they move inwardly into meditation practices, which we're going to talk about later. Pratyahara and dharana have to do with the lower mental plane. Vijnanamaya has to do with the higher mental plane and the beginning of dhyana and the first type of samadhi. There are many types of samadhi within the Yoga Sutras. These are samadhi with an experiencer, with an I. And this is a very important point here for you to understand. The soul is basically known as the ahamkara in this model here. The ahamkara is the sense of I-ness. We always have a sense of I-ness, I exist, in all of these levels here. Whether I exist as a coordinated selfish personality, here and here, or whether I exist as an integrated personality, much more mental, somewhat on the spiritual path, which is represented here and also here, or whether I exist as a soul-infused personality, which includes all of this here. There's still a sense of I-ness. I am the one having these experiences, whether it's I am the selfish one having these experiences, or I am the soul-infused ahamkara having these experiences. But at some point in meditation, in samadhi, the samadhis at these levels are without experiencer. I am not the one experiencing these things in meditation anymore. I am not the one sitting here realizing I am meditating. It is dissolved. That is what is meant by the causal body or the egoic lotus or the soul disappears at what Bailey calls the fourth initiation or her fourth expansion of consciousness. The ahamkara is dissolved and we move fully into the triad here or into Atma Buddhi Manas or Sat Chit Ananda. And that is very important for us to understand as we go throughout these Yoga Sutra training. So now let's give a highly oversimplified understanding of section 2 or book 2 of the Yoga Sutras. Before we can move into the practice of samadhi, we must prepare different layers, and we have to peel off the outer layers first before we can have removed enough of the coverings or vrittis that we can start to experience the inner layers that take us into the various types of samadhi. The main way to prepare is to practice moral precepts, the yamas, the niyamas, the do's, and the don'ts. Why do we need to do that? Because if we're living an immoral life, when we sit down to meditate and discover who we are as a self, all we're going to discover in that meditation is all of our emotional issues and traumas and guilt, or maybe we're trying to live a moral life, but we've had negative things happen to us. And so our entire meditation is going to be about our emotional stuff. The more we can practice the do's and don'ts of how to live a spiritual life, the less of those kinds of emotional coverings we're going to have, the anger, the guilt, the depression, and so forth. Now, the practicing practicing the yamas and niyamas doesn't just involve yoga. It can involve many other things. Now, practicing the yamas and niyamas doesn't just involve yoga. It can involve many other things, just simply disciplining ourselves to not do certain things and to do other things that are morally correct, making the right choices. It can involve, in our modern day times, psychotherapy, where we learn to clean this stuff up so that we can sit in meditation. Meditation and the Yoga Sutras, especially these higher meditations, are not useful for psychological trauma and psychological illness or difficulties. We have to do a different kind of work and preparation because those coverings are too hard, too rigid. We need to dissolve them in different kinds of methods that don't always involve meditation before we can really practice the Yoga Sutras. If we try to get into these higher meditative states too soon without having done the moral do's and don'ts, we'll see this in section 3 of the Yoga Sutras, we start to have real problems. These moral precepts help us stop the mind, the emotions, and the body from being disturbed. What does that mean? You go into meditation and your mind is already relatively calm and ready for meditation because you have a life that helps support that. You don't have lots of physical or financial concerns that is all you think about if you sit down to meditate. You don't have all the emotional highs and lows. You don't have an ill body that all you sit down to meditate and all you think about is your aches and pains. You don't have a mind that is full of these kinds of thoughts, monkey mind about this happening in life or this needing to get done in life. You have ordered your life in such a way that you have enough calm that you can start the practice of true meditation and samadhi practice. So let's go back briefly again to these chart renditions. In other words, you're attempting to remove the coverings of the physical and emotional levels of the Annamaya Kosha and the Pranamaya Kosha with the yamas and niyamas, pranayama and asanas, so that you have enough preparation to begin the real meditative work. And we'll see this emphasized in our study of the Yoga Sutras. Now, if we have it, a good overview, which is comparing the Yoga Sutras to our model that we use in terms of the Alice Bailey teachings, and you can also see the Vedanta and the Theosophy teachings as well that they were using that came from traditional Hinduism here, or the yogic Vedanta system. And again, if you are wanting to learn more about this, please come to the patreon.com/soul to spirit channel. There are many, many perks for you there if you want to become part of this training as well. there you